Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Congresswoman Harriet Hageman. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
It's wonderful to be here.
We saw a historic presidential debate between current President Joe Biden, past President Donald Trump play out last week, and we're still discussing the fallout of the debate. Largely, the conversation has been, is President Biden going to continue to run? What did you think of his performance, first of all?
It wasn't surprising. And in fact, I have been saying for well over a year that Joe Biden is suffering from severe dementia. So, what is surprising to me is the reaction of the press, who are now trying to act as though they didn't know that this was the situation. And the reality is that there have been a lot of people who have been working overtime to try to cover up the fact that he is not cognitively all there. All anybody has had to do is look at videos of him from a year ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. He is an entirely different person. You can tell by his physical appearance, you can tell by his eyes. It appears to me that when he does go into public, they have him on drugs. His eyes are severely dilated. They look very, very strange. You see no color in them at all. They're just these really serious black dots that you can tell by the look on his face, the way he holds his mouth, the way he walks. So I wasn't surprised that he was not capable of having a coherent discussion last Thursday. What I'm surprised about is the number of people who act surprised that they didn't know that.
We talked back in March, and you did question the president's mental fitness there. Before I continue, I just have to say there is no evidence that he is on drugs. But I was speaking with your colleague, Congressman Anthony D'Esposito, yesterday, and I asked him, as a lawmaker, as someone who works closer to the president than the average American, what his thoughts were. And he said, while President Biden does appear sharp at times, that is few and far between. And a lot of the time when observing the president, he is like how he was on Thursday night. Is that something you agree with?
I would agree with that. And what I think that it's telling that yesterday, when his spokesman was asked about whether he was on drugs, the only thing she would say is he's not taking any cold medicine. So she's being very specific in terms of trying to say, well, he wasn't taking cold medicine, which was not the question at all. But from the standpoint of him having lucid moments, I'm not sure that I've seen the lucid moments. I think you even go back to the State of the Union address, and it was an angry man screaming from a podium, almost like your senile neighbor who's screaming, "Get off my lawn." He wasn't well. I mean, anybody with a lick of sense can look at what his physical and mental condition has been like for quite some time. And I am not at all surprised, again, by the way that he performed on Thursday night. He is suffering from dementia. We can see it. We know that. And so I have been asking the question, many people have been asking the question, who is running this country? Who is making the decisions? And I think that that's where we really need to go with these legitimate questions. Who's making the decisions about the open border? Is it Mayorkas? Has Mayorkas gone completely rogue and made the decision about not closing the border? Who's making the decision about Ukraine? What is the issue with Ukraine? And Joe Biden ostensibly just entered into a 10-year contract or agreement with Ukraine to provide security from the United States of America. None of us voted on that. The House didn't vote on that. Whose decision was it for the United States of America to enter into a 10-year security agreement with Ukraine? We know that they're withholding money and resources from Israel, despite the fact that Congress did vote to send that money to Israel. Who's making the decision to withhold that money? These are all very legitimate questions that we should be asking. Who is making the decisions in the White House?
His team says that the word dementia hasn't been used from his team. They are chalking this up to a bad debate night. You clearly think that there's something more. So what have the conversations been like with other lawmakers in the House, both Republicans, I'm sure you've talked to them, as well as Democrats, if you've talked to them about this?
So I'm going to repeat it again. I think anyone who has been paying attention recognizes that is a severe cognitive decline in the president, from on a month-to-month basis, on a 6-month basis, on a yearly basis, on a 2-year basis. Just go back and look at the videos from a year ago or 2 years ago. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm an attorney. But I've had experience dealing with people over the years, as all of us have. Talk to Ronnie Jackson, Representative Ronnie Jackson, who is a physician and can describe for you, yeah, he's seriously declining from the standpoint of knowing what's going on around him. The gentleman is 81 years old. Now, look, my mother is going to be 101 years old this year. She's sharp as a tack. Absolutely sharp as a tack. She's not suffering from dementia. I'm around people who are aged. I'm around other people who are suffering from cognitive decline. So again, all of the people who are not trying to cover up what's been going on with Joe Biden are well aware of what's going on. I don't need a physician to tell me what my eyes are showing me.
So can you elaborate on what those conversations with fellow lawmakers have been like since the fallout from the debate? Because the president had trouble forming incoherent coherent sentences at times. He was trailing off. People seemed to be surprised after the debate. So in your conversations, you're saying no one in your circles was surprised.
We weren't surprised. We've been watching this take place for quite some time. The Joe Biden that we've been watching for the last 6 months showed up last Thursday. What the conversation before the debate is what were they going to try to do to try to cover up the fact that he's got these serious cognitive issues? So the question was, were they going to try to dial in on some kind of a cocktail to allow him to function better? Whether, I don't even know what kind of drugs they would have been giving him to do that. Were they changing his sleeping patterns so that 9 o'clock at night appeared to be 11 o'clock in the morning for him? His own staff has indicated that from about 10 to 4 is really the only period of time during the day that they can even engage with him, or he's capable of making decisions. So did they change his sleeping habits so that when he showed up on the stage that day, he didn't know it was 9 o'clock at night? So I'm going to go back to what I think is the most significant issue here. We're all focusing on his physical and mental decline, which I've been talking about for months and months and months, because I'm not an idiot. I mean, we know that there's something going on with the president. All of us do. So the bigger issue is who is running the country and who is making these incredibly important decisions. I'll go back to the Ukrainian thing again. He entered into an agreement with Ukraine for 10 years to provide security with no vote from Congress whatsoever. That's our role. He does not have the unilateral authority to do that. But who behind Joe Biden is the one making that decision? Because it's clearly not the president. Who is behind the decision of withholding aid to Israel? Because it's clearly not the president, despite the fact that Congress had actually voted to send that aid to Israel. Who is making the decisions about the student loans? The billions of dollars that the taxpayers of the United States of America are being saddled with because somebody wants to get a degree in gender studies and then can't get a job. Despite the fact that the United States Supreme Court has said that the president does not have the legal authority to do that in the first place. So I want to get back to the question of who is running the country, who is making these decisions, what unelected bureaucrat or bureaucrats are making the decisions for Joe Biden, because Joe Biden's not there.
I mean, do you have an answer for your own question? I'll throw it back to you. As a lawmaker who someone is in Washington, you're more privy to these closed-door conversations. Who do you think is making the decisions if you don't think it's Joe Biden?
So I think that Mayorkas is very much involved with making decisions about the open border, and that's why we impeached him. Because he is violating the law. He has repeatedly violated the law since the moment that Joe Biden took office. He and Joe Biden both. They do not have the legal authority to do en masse paroles into the country. They nullified the Remain in Mexico policy. They do not have the authority to grant what is ostensibly asylum for 10 to 15 years at a time. So he's blatantly violating the law. So I think that Mayorkas is absolutely culpable for what's going on with the border. I think Christopher Wray is absolutely responsible for some of the decisions where he's targeting conservatives, targeting Catholics, targeting parents who want to go to school boards and challenge what is going on with the education of their children. I think that Merrick Garland is also involved with targeting the political enemies of this regime. I think that was clear after the decision by the United States Supreme Court last week dealing with the January 6th issue. I have been saying for years now that you cannot use what is a financial statute that was adopted after the Enron situation to try to prosecute people for walking through the U.S. Capitol. Yet that's what they did, and the United States Supreme Court agreed with me. So I think Merrick Garland has been very much involved with persecuting what they perceive to be the enemies of the Democrats in this regime. Are there others? Yes. I look at, well, Pete Buttigieg, he's really just kind of out to lunch on pretty much everything. He's been a failure from top to bottom. So that's why you see the disasters in the transportation industry. You see that with the issue with our airliners. You see that with the train derailments. You see that with the challenges with the supply chain. So I think there's a variety of people who are working on these issues within this administration, none of them being the president of the United States. So again, we have no accountability for the decisions that are being made because the president is not the one making those decisions.
Congresswoman, back in March, we had a conversation, and like I said earlier, you did bring up questions about President Biden's mental fitness. One of your colleagues, Congressman Chip Roy, is calling on Vice President Kamala Harris to invoke the 25th Amendment. Is that something you support?
I'm not there. No, that isn't where I am. I think that we need to, again, ferret out what is going on here. We need to move forward with, again, additional information being provided to us as to who's making the decisions. We also need additional information from the physicians as to what his physical and mental situation is. So I'm not on board with seeking to invoke the 25th Amendment at this point.
And as a member of Congress,
I don't want Kamala Harris as the president. I'll be very blunt about that. I think Kamala Harris is an absolute disaster as a political leader. I do not want Kamala Harris as president of the United States. I think it would be a disaster for us.
So do you think that President Biden should step aside from the 2024 run?
I don't know what they're going to do. I think they're in a terrible, terrible situation. You've got the Ohio primary or the Ohio election. He has to be on the ballot in Ohio by the first week in August, or there won't be a Democrat on the ballot for president in Ohio. So you've got that situation. You've got, I believe, there's 6 other states, Nevada and Arizona and Georgia, Wisconsin, and I believe Michigan. They've got a terrible mess in those states because he is the candidate. He is the person. So they've got a situation that they have to deal with in those states as to how they would even replace him on the ballot. In addition to which, they can't just launder this money from Joe Biden raising it for his campaign and then turning around and doling it out to the next candidate that may step up in line. That's not how this situation works. If they attempted that, they would be violating campaign finance laws. So they're in a terrible mess, and they're in a terrible mess because they've been lying to the American people, because they have been lying about what his situation is. They have been lying about his competency. But this didn't just start last week or last Friday. They have been lying to us for years and years and years as to his qualifications, his mental state, his physical state, and his ability to do the job. He wasn't fit for this job when he ran for it 4 years ago. Yet, again, I'm going to say it, the press and the Democrats have been lying to us about his cognitive abilities. And so now they're in this situation trying to figure out, what do we do? I think we ought to care about the United States of America. I think we ought to be looking at who is making the decisions, these momentous decisions that should be being made by the president or at least Congress, and they're being made by again, unelected bureaucrats.
You are bringing up 2 questions that you have. One, if President Biden isn't making these decisions, who is? And 2, you have other questions about President Biden's health. So as a member of Congress, is there any way that you can seek additional information?
Well, I don't know the answer to that question right now. I think that in light of the fact that the dam has finally broken and people are questioning what I have been questioning for months and months and months and months, maybe that is a question that we can answer. I don't know the answer to that question yet, but as soon as I return to Washington, D.C., I can assure you I'm going to be speaking with leadership and asking what is it that we can do to ensure that we are protecting our republic when we have someone who's clearly an incompetent at the head of government.
Well, as you get answers to the questions, I hope you come back on, join me, discuss what you find. Congresswoman, I appreciate the time today. Happy 4th of July.
Thank you so much, and you have a great week.